Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. And today we are on the Tin Woodman of Oz. So this is the 1918 original edition illustrated by John R. Neill with the illustrations that I like, the ones that are my childhood, the ones that I look at and I say, this is how Oz books look in my head, because these are the ones that I grew up reading. So this is that quintessential Oz road trip book where you can say the point is the journey, not the destination. But Oz books, like I keep saying, are so much more literally that this book is specifically about the journey. There is no point that the end point of this book could have been just about anything. It wouldn't really matter, because the important thing is the wandering along the way, the finding of new friends and enemies and excitements and strangenesses. And so that's what this is. This is a book that we've stepped away from Dorothy, because as much as I love Dorothy, who is hardcore, as is Trot and Betsy Bobbin, these three girls who something weird happens and they kind of just roll with it. Them and Button Bright, these kids who kind of, they've wound up in Oz, but they've wound up in Oz because they just kind of, they're scared of things, but nothing really takes them aback. Nothing really upsets them. They just keep right on trucking. It's really, really fantastic. Anyways, but we don't get them in this book. We get the Tin Woodman, obviously, pictured here on the cover with Woot the Wanderer, who is, in a way, the person who sparks off this entire book, and next to him is the Tin Soldier, who we will get to later because he doesn't show up until partway through the story. Luckily, this is one of the books, this is slightly unusual in that, unlike many of the other books in this series, like TikTok of Oz or the Scarecrow of Oz, these are books where this person named in the title is in fact central to this, rather than that simply being a name that we all recognize to convince us to pick up the book. So, Woot the Wanderer is he's a young man, a boy from backwoods of Oz who decided he wanted to wander all of Oz to see what there was to see. That's why he is called the Wanderer. It is not that he goes from town to town, and whenever he starts to fall in love, he hops in his car and drives around the world. Thank you, 1950s and 60s. But the point is, am I that big a fan of him? No, we're not going to get sidetracked into golden oldies of my parents' era. Anyways, so he winds up at the Tin Woodman's castle because, as we know, the Tin Woodman has become Emperor of the Winkies, because everybody in Oz has a king or a queen or an emperor or a grand poobah of some sort, all of whom are supposed to be subject to Ozma in the Emerald City. But anyway, so the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow have decided to become castle mates. They're definitely not roommates, and a castle is bigger than a house. They're castle mates, really. And Woot asks after their stories, and the Tin Woodman, Nick Chopper, tells him the story of how he became a tin man as opposed to, a regular flesh and blood human. And the thing is that, according to the author's note at the start of this, This was inspired by many children asking what happened to the Tin Woodman's fiancee, which, for the record, I believe that was actually answered in the first book, but I guess everybody forgot in the meanwhile. So the Tin Woodman, it is suggested the Tin Woodman that since he had promised to marry this young woman, Nimmy Ammy, he should probably go do it. Cause, he vanished on her, and he should probably check up on her and find out if maybe she still wants to marry him. He expresses some concern about this because the Wizard of Oz gave him a heart full of sawdust, which, acts as a heart for him, allowing him to care about things, but it is a caring heart, not a loving one, which means that he can't love anybody in a romantic fashion. He is permanently asexual. Unlike the Scarecrow, who we all know has a huge, huge thing for Scraps, the patchwork girl. Well, aromantic, I suppose, rather than asexual. I don't even want to think about how awkward that would be. His hinges probably pinch. Anyways, so, the thing is, though, that he did promise that, and he could bring her with him, and she could be Empress of the Winkies, and, I mean, he sort of owes it to her to look into it, so he decides he's going to go on a quest to find Nimmy Ammy and offer her the opportunity to become Empress of the Winkies. The Scarecrow, who is his best friend, goes with him, and Woot the Wanderer asks if he can come along because, well, this is his thing. He wanders. He would like to wander with congenial company. And this could be an interesting thing to observe, so he comes along. Woot, throughout this book, is kind of... He's a little morally iffy at times from an Oz perspective, but at the same time, Woot is very much a voice of common sense. That is, when he is faced with, potential dangers, he looks at the two of them and he says, you know what makes the most sense is not walking into danger to begin with? We could just not... fundamentally, we could just not. But the Scarecrow and the Woodman bully him into going to look into things, and they almost get in trouble, and they get attacked by balloon people who they have to defeat with a pin. And various exciting things happen, like being caught by a so-called Yukuhu who transforms the Tin Woodman into a tin owl, and the Scarecrow into a straw-stuffed bear, pictured here. And Woot the Wanderer gets turned into a monkey, who is wearing an apron in this because the Yukuhu uses, among other things, a magic apron, which Woot steals and makes off with like a bandit, and with the use of the magic apron, they are able to escape, taking with them Polychrome, the Rainbow's daughter, who has come back for another appearance in this book, and who has been captured by the Yukuhu and turned into a caged singing bird, canary or something. So they continue on their way and have various adventures until Dorothy and Ozma look in on them with Ozma's magic picture, the one that allows Ozma to see anything that is going on right now if she so desires. And they decide they better go and bail everybody out and figure out how to turn everybody back into their proper selves. And they continue on their way. And indeed, on the way, they run into a tin soldier whose story is practically identical to the Tin Woodman's. That is, he met Nimmy Ammy and fell in love with her. After Nick Chopper had fallen in love with her, proposed, been chopped into pieces, and then rusted solid and had been unable to return to her, leaving her abandoned and thinking that, he had just run off on her, and so she has to be talked around by the Tin Soldier, who then upsets the Wicked Witch of the East, the one that Dorothy dropped the house on. And the Wicked Witch of the East then basically enchants the Tin Soldier's sword to do the same thing to him that Nick Chopper's enchanted axe had done. That is, chops off all of his limbs one by one until he gets turned into a Tin Man by the local tinsmith as well. Then he rusts solid on his way to see Nimmy Ammy, and so the two of them, upon realizing that they are both going to propose to the same young woman, agree to go together and offer her the chance of which of them she would like to marry. And, the story continues on its way like this. And they run into this guy, whose name I can't remember and haven't bothered to look up or write down. He's kind of a sauropod-y thing, and he really likes eating straw. In fact, they basically bribe him to help by allowing him to eat the straw out of the Scarecrow, who then gets restuffed with hay on the other side until he finds some straw to fix himself up properly. And they go on. Eventually they find Nimmy Ammy, and it turns out that in Oz, while you cannot die, you can in fact create a brand new person by taking somebody's old body parts, stitching them together into a sort of a weird Frankenstein's monster, and then setting him up as a man with a name that is one half Nick Chopper and one half former Captain Fighter, so he's now known as Chop Fight, the FYT, Chop Fight. Anyways, and Nimmy Ammy decided that she wanted to marry him, so they got married, and she is contented with her incredibly grumpy husband. He is extremely grouchy. Like, I can't even begin to get what's up with that. He's angry and unhappy. But Nimmy Ammy is apparently content where she is and does not want to marry either the Tin Woodman or the Tin Soldier. And the two of them, after making sure that she's happy where she is, decide that they will go on their way, having at least resolved the issue of what happened to her. And the Tin Soldier moves to the Emerald City, and the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow go back to the land of the Winkies and the Tin Woodman's Tin Castle, and Woot the Wanderer decides he's going to continue wandering. This is a book with a deus ex machina, with an incredibly abrupt, silly ending, and yet that's not the point. It's very, like I said at the start, these books are so much about the journey that the objective of the books, this MacGuffin, if you will, is even more so than some things. It's basically just there to get them out of the house, and the only thing that matters is wandering the backwoods of Oz and seeing what's there, seeing weird critters with long necks that like to eat straw. It's seeing balloon people. It's seeing the sow and her husband. There's these two pigs living in a house who are willing to give Woot the Wanderer, who is the only sort of normal human person who eats normal human person food, willing to give him, some food. It's seeing Ginger again, the young woman who at one time took over the Emerald City as General Ginger, because she and her fellow young women were really, really tired of being housewives and wanted something more. And like they were awesome, and it's kind of a pity that they and their knitting needle armed army didn't remain a thing, because I adored Ginger in I really, really did adore Ginger in that first book that she appears in. And so, she's back for a brief appearance in this. It's about discovering what a Yukuhu is. It's about all the oddnesses of Oz. And I'm over time, but that's all I have to say, I guess, so I will see you all next week.